Hello, welcome to the museum. Thank you for coming today. My name is Lindsay Thieman. I'm the curator here, and this is Vesna Jovanovic, and she's our current artist in residence. And we're going to talk a little bit about her project and the origins of the residency, and we'll start from there. So I hope you've had a chance to look around. The museum was founded in 1954 by Dr. Max Thorek, and from the very beginning it's incorporated a lot of artwork, including especially this room, the Hall of Murals, and the Hall of Immortals, which is right across the hall. And these are all commissioned artworks representing great figures or discoveries in medical history. And then in 1998, the museum started a program called Anatomy in the Gallery, and that's two adjacent galleries on the 4th floor of the museum, where we show usually two concurrent solo exhibitions of artwork that is medically inspired or relates to embodiment in general. And in fact, Vesna showed here through the Anatomy in the Gallery program in 2009. When that program started, although the documentation is a little bit lacking, I believe it was because there were a number of Chicago and Illinois artists who approached the museum and were creating work that was either inspired by our collections or that they felt was in tune with what we were displaying in our educational exhibits and looking for a place to display it. But as time progressed, kind of expanded, and now usually show one national artist and one local artist for each exhibition. And then in about 2010, Rebecca Keller, who is a Chicago writer and sculptor and teaches at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, approached me about a special project. She is the founder of the Excavating History Project, and she wanted to bring a collective of artists to the museum to create artistic interventions kind of throughout the entire building that would be generated by their creative research into the site itself. And so that was the beginning of, I guess, the expansion of contemporary art beyond our dedicated gallery space. And so this is one of the pieces that was created for that exhibition. It was a film reenactment that brought to life this mural, which is in the space you may have seen upstairs where Vesna is currently working. And then as a result of that, Annie Heckman, another Chicago artist who had also previously shown through the Anatomy in the Gallery program at the museum, she was part of the Excavating History Collective and had begun an animation project that was based on her research into the museum's collection of Trefan skulls from ancient Peru. And so after the Excavating History project ended, she wanted to carry on with her residency. There was kind of more research to be done. So at that point, we had found in the collection a film that was labeled only Trefening Operation Dr. Grania, Peru, 1953. So we were very intrigued by that, and also found out through our research that that was the centerpiece of the museum's original Peru room, because except for this room, the Hall of Murals and the Hall of Immortals, the museum was originally organized by country, so that each national section of the International College of Surgeons, of which the museum is a division, would have their achievements represented. So we started looking more into the Peru room, and we had the film digitized, and then the project kind of unfolded from there. Over actually 1.5 years of work and research and new discoveries. And then when we went to kind of think about how to structure the residency, because we wanted to first present it in an exhibition and then to move on to invite other artists to come and be our artists in residence, we decided to go with the title of her original animation, which was Open, because we thought it represented in many ways the goal of the program, which was to open our collections to local artists for them to have in-depth access and be able to study them, but also to open our space for the artists to have studio space to work in one of our exhibits, and also to open a dialogue while they're working in our space with our visitors. In a way, the artists in residence serve as the museum's ambassadors to our visitors. I think as the curator, I often work in the back of the museum. I don't interact with visitors all that much, and then the only other time they see a museum employee would be when they first come in. So actually Vesna probably has more in-depth knowledge of what our visitors think and how they act when they're actually moving through the museum than many of us do.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as I show some slides of things that I've done. So.
And then also open because we decided on not really having a structure or any rules for the residency other than that the work that was created had to be something that could only be created here and through interaction with our collections. And so we presented Annie's exhibition, which is currently on the 4th floor of the museum. And this kind of represents the diversity of how it unfolded over time. And then when Vesna approached me and was interested in becoming the second artist in residence for the museum, I was excited because I really enjoyed her first exhibition, but also because I had heard about her experience at artist residencies since then, and I knew that she was, the work she created there was very influenced by her environment and her experiences in those surroundings. That's exactly what we were looking for. So when she began here, we situated her in this space with the only stipulation that she could do whatever she wanted.
Okay, and so I arrived at the museum completely open to creating anything, basically. And I really didn't know where to begin, because I've done various residencies in the past where I would be on a farm or in another old building or any other place like that, and I tried to connect it to the human body, and I'd have to find a certain thread in there to make my work off of. And here, to connect my artwork to the human body through this museum was just overwhelming, because everything that I saw around me had to do with the body. So I really didn't know where to begin, what to choose, how to start, where to start. So I kind of, I looked around and I saw so many interesting things all over the museum. And here are some examples in the slides of various things that I encountered that I found interesting and took pictures of. And really, as I walked through, I really didn't know what to do or how to begin my project. So I just kind of looked at various things. This is the apothecary downstairs. Sometimes people miss this. It's kind of in the back, but it's very cool. There's all kinds of stuff in these slides here. These are heart valves. So as I walked around, I really didn't know what to do, like how to start. And occasionally, the employees of the museum, the staff would bring me various objects as well. And I want to say thank you, actually, before I move on. So I want to say thank you to Lindsay and also Peter Rosen and Emmett Liston for helping me with this project. It's been incredible being here for the past 6 months. But they would bring me various objects and say, hey, look at this. Like, this is pretty cool. We found this in storage in the archives. What do you think? And also the building itself was really interesting, just how it relates to the body and how it was built as a living space. So I decided that since I felt kind of stuck because I was so overwhelmed, there's so much around me, that I would just start sketching and see what comes of that. And just to kind of not be idle and to actually do something. So I decided to just look around me in the room that I was situated in, actually, and I found this very large bladder stone. It's about the size of a baseball or something, and decided to sketch it. And so that's how I got started. I just started sketching various things in the museum, And I actually have my sketchbook right here. I can show you guys if you want to see it afterwards. I'll show people in person. And then there's these are a couple of skulls from the archives that were pulled out, and I sketched those as well. And then I just started experimenting, trying different things. Here I was playing with medical illustrations on a scanner, moving them around and scanning them. Then I was looking at things relating to human vision. And I threw this slide in. This is a previous project before I came here. And just to kind of contextualize this a little bit, this was a project that I was working on right before I came here called Foreign Bodies. And so that kind of had an influence on what I was thinking about at the museum as well. The Foreign Bodies project involved things hidden in the body that were either inserted there or that accidentally ended up in the body. So here's an image of an ear with a moth in the ear canal. So that was something that kind of got me started because I was thinking about foreign bodies, and then I started thinking about, well, what's the flip side of that? Familiar bodies, and where is that threshold? And in the meantime, this was all last October. In the meantime, I was also reading this book that my partner bought me by Anna Marie Moll, which is about the ontology of the body in medical practice. And the book was also discussing things relating to thresholds of the body. Where does the body end and the other begin? The non-body, basically, and how do we characterize that and define that? So those things were all kind of mixing in my head, and I was thinking about all these different things. And I started to kind of slowly get a sense of what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to do something with that threshold, especially because surgery breaks that threshold in a way. And when instruments are inserted, and also potentially things that can help the body heal, these things sort of break that threshold and become part of the body in a way, but are also kind of invasive. So these are my sketchbook pages, and here I'm thinking about the threshold, and I got this idea of the image of an oval, and that was very intuitive. I was thinking about how I wanted these bodies to be portrayed as portraits, as people with names. That I didn't want them to be very impersonal. I wanted to sort of look at the medical instruments around the museum and actually think about the stories behind them, think about the people involved, and what they may have, what they went through, or maybe how the surgeons related to their patients and things like that. So the oval, to me, reminded me of like a Victorian portrait, and it just made sense to me. So I started thinking about the oval and how I could maybe use that oval as the threshold of the body and have it sort of portray the body in a relatively abstract way. And so I thought, okay, well, let me draw some ovals on my ink blots. The way I usually start working is by creating a bunch of ink blots. You probably already saw a few images in here. I did these little drawings of ink spilled on paper, but I'll show a few of those in a minute. So I decided to start the way I usually do with those ink blots, like the ear image that I showed earlier, but then to add this oval in there, and I started looking for what's called an ellipsograph, what draws ovals. And strangely enough, they're not really available anymore. I looked online and everywhere. The only ones I could find were like these antique objects that cost hundreds of dollars, and I just needed something to draw ovals with, literally. So this wasn't going to work for me. And then I thought, well, I'll just use the old method of putting 2 pins and thread, and then just tightening the thread and going around with a pencil to draw the oval. And that sort of works. I mean, it was kind of clumsy. I'd usually get 2 lines, 2 outlines, so I wasn't quite right. And then I came across an oval mat cutter, and those are readily available. So I thought, oh, that's cool. And the cutting with the oval mat cutter actually kind of relates to surgery, so I was kind of performing these surgeries on my drawings, and I thought that would be perfect. So here's the oval that could be cut out with a mat cutter. In the meantime, I randomly came across something on Facebook, which is where a lot of random things end up. So among all the kittens and various other images, as I was scrolling through, I came across these manholes. So this appeared on my Facebook page, newsfeed, and I looked at this and thought, oh my God, I could take my ovals and turn them and flip them around and have this image of this ink spilled kind of get broken up. So here's one example where I spilled ink on paper, but then I cut out an oval and then I flipped it 180 degrees and glued it back in and basically taped it from the back. So this was progress. I mean, at this point it was probably about November or December, and I felt like, okay, things are happening, and here's several ovals. So I decided to just make a bunch of these before I started drawing on them. And I have tons of these. You'll see a big stack upstairs. In the meantime, as I was Googling ovals and portraits, I came across a short story by Edgar Allan Poe called Oval Portrait. It was uncanny how much in this story really related to my project, because it's a very short story, and I actually hung it. It's only 2 pages. I hung it in my studio space upstairs if you guys want to read it. But basically, it's about a man who, let me try to remember it. A man who is injured. He is gravely injured, and he gets taken to a chateau, which kind of relates to this building as well. Do you want to?
I think the chateau was abandoned, and so he was turning on the lights, and the owner had a lot of different artwork that was displayed all over, but there was one piece that was dark, and so he moved the lamp over to illuminate that piece and found himself completely drawn in by it. It was a portrait of a woman. Mm-hmm. And what did he say? That it was so lifelike that it kind of sprung from the image. And eventually, after staring at it for a while, he had to just move the light away because it was so distracting and enthralling that he couldn't go to sleep, and that would have been the end of his night if he didn't move the light away. And then he later came to discover that...
I found some kind of book, I think, in the room about this image and how it was painted by an artist who painted such a lifelike image that as he painted his wife, she slowly withered and died.
So by capturing her life in the painting, he drew the life out of her physically.
And I thought that was really pertinent to medical illustration and how it objectifies human bodies for the purposes of, helping with the illness and stuff like that. But at the same time, it sort of removes the personal part of the image. So here's the first instrument that I decided to work with, and once I made all these ovals, I decided, okay, I'm going to start drawing something, and let me take a look around, and I picked this item. And honestly, it didn't look particularly exciting visually, but I had heard Lindsay talk about how important this is for the collection when she gave tours, curator tours. So I thought I have to find out more about this thing because it doesn't look that special.
So what I usually tell people when I'm giving them tours in order to try and make this special is that this is the Carrel-Lindbergh perfusion pump. So it was invented by the French researcher and surgeon Alexis Carrel, who was working at the time with Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator. And Lindbergh, the story goes, his sister-in-law had developed a heart condition as a result of having rheumatic fever, and he had a background actually in engineering before he became a pilot, and he started to wonder about why it was impossible to perform surgery on the heart at the time.
That's an image of Lindbergh.
And of course it was because the body and the heart itself couldn't be kept viable without any type of assistance. So he went to work with Carrel, and together they developed this device, which is very complicated and involved all sorts of gas and fluid flow, but what it essentially did was keep an organ viable outside of the body through perfusing it periodically with nutrient liquids. And so, although it wasn't ever widely used because it was, again, very complicated and difficult to keep sterile, it is in a way a precursor to the heart-lung machine that is used today. And then Carrel himself I always like to tell people about because he was such a kind of strange, interesting figure. He was pursuing this idea of the culture of organs, but also did work with culturing tissues in the lab because he was more or less interested in establishing or making steps towards human immortality. And before he started working at this institute where he worked with Lindbergh, he was kind of, well, first he apparently witnessed a miracle at Lourdes and wrote a testimonial about it and was a bit of an outcast from the medical community. Then he subsequently received the Nobel Prize, and then he went to work at the Rockefeller Institute with Lindbergh. And so aside from it just being overall very interesting, it's notable because actually Lindbergh himself donated the pump to the museum in the year we opened. And one of the things I generally like to emphasize as I go through the museum with visitors is that it's not just doctors or scientists who kind of invent devices or make discoveries that can influence the path of medical history. And also that many of these great figures that we idolize or make into immortals actually had personal motivations for their scientific explorations. And that's a picture that is also on display in the case, which shows one of Carrel's laboratory workers. He had some kind of strange practices where he made them wear all black in the laboratory with some kind of specious excuse about it being more sanitary or something. But
the
this
walls
whole
and the furniture was painted black, the walls were painted black, the sheets, everything was black.
Yeah, so it was part of, it seemed like a ritualistic kind of cultivation of life and cells. And it's interesting because I knew that Vesna's earliest work with the ink spills was incorporating a lot of laboratory glass as the added elements.
Yeah, this is a piece from 2002, so way, way back. And this is where my work got started. When I first started working with the ink blot method and then adding drawing into it. I have a background in chemistry, so I was really drawn to laboratory glassware, and this piece really shows it. So I thought it was kind of funny, I mean, in retrospect, looking at it now, like that I chose this piece of laboratory glassware as my first piece at the museum here. And it turned out to be this incredible and very strange thing because it was basically a replacement for a heart, and it kept organs alive, the Lindbergh pump. And here's another sketchbook page. So I decided to start with the Lindbergh pump, and I started reading about both Lindbergh and Carrel, who collaborated to create this pump. And Lindbergh basically engineered it, and then Carrel was more interested in how it can keep things alive. There are a lot of things in the Time magazine articles and various other things that we came across through our research. All kinds of bizarre stuff about
chicken flesh.
Yeah, like chicken flesh, yeah.
One of Carrel's early experiments with tissue culture was where he had this embryonic chicken flesh cells that he kept in a tube that was perfused with nutrient liquid, and apparently he believed that he had kept the original cells alive or dividing for over 100 years, but as it turned out, it was actually there were new cells in the nutrient fluid. But so the Time magazine reporter had this very sensationalistic account where he said, "Oh, great!" It was like
the whole Earth might now theoretically be covered with a film of soft flesh. It's what Time magazine, the conclusion Time magazine came to. Basically, he was multiplying this chicken heart and making it grow, and then they had to keep cutting pieces off and removing it, and it was just growing and growing nonstop. And so he was trying to find eternal life, basically. That was Carrel's goal, to find eternal life. And then Lindbergh's goal, interestingly enough, was to find something that would heal the human heart, or be a replacement for it. And that's because Elizabeth Morrow, his sister-in-law, had a lesion on her heart from having rheumatic fever. And there was no, at the time, there was no cure for that. There were no pacemakers, and even operating on the heart was not possible because they couldn't perfuse the body and keep it alive while they work on the heart. So this pump led to both of those discoveries, ultimately. So I became interested in that story, that Lindbergh, of all things, and all reasons that he could have gotten into this perfusion pump, he decided to get into this project because of this simple need for, well, not simple, but this need for his sister-in-law, you know, this sort of more of a personal story between him and his sister-in-law. And she had a lot of medical problems because of that, and she ended up dying pretty young as a result. So I decided to make a piece that surrounds that story. And reading about Carell's laboratory and where they were developing this, that there was a spiral staircase leading into the lab at the Rockefeller Center. And Time magazine actually really colorfully describes this, along with the multiplying chicken flesh and everything else. So I started compiling these images and ideas and putting them together in my notebook as I usually do. I have a bunch of photocopies of my notebook, of this sketchbook upstairs if you guys want to check it out. And then I started drawing, and here's my work in progress, and this is what the finished piece looked like. So I titled this Elizabeth Morrow after the sister-in-law. So this is how I imagine sort of her life being had the pacemaker been around. And that's the little bubble-looking thing on the left panel in the upper right corner. And then on the other side, I created this kind of monstrosity that has lungs, a liver, and a really prominent kidney. Because in one part of the article that I was reading about Carell and Lindbergh, Carell had talked about eternal life and how he also wanted to basically build various parts of the human body artificially. And I thought, well, how far does that go? And could one build an entire human body artificially then? So that's kind of my little tribute to that. And then I painted the background black, the way his lab was painted black. And I have the pump on both sides. They're actually mirror images. This was an ink blot.
And both of them have the spiral staircase.
Mm-hmm. So here's a detail image. And then as I kept reading about Carell, I discovered that he won the Nobel Prize specifically for suturing blood vessels. And I don't know, do you want to?
Yeah, he won the Nobel Prize for this technique of suturing blood vessels together. In part, it was kind of the first successful blood transfusion. Mm-hmm. He sewed together the vein of a father to the artery of the daughter who needed a transfusion, and by this direct anastomosis is what they call it, but it prevented infection in any intervening device just by stitching together two blood vessels, which is both kind of strangely simple and complex at the same time. And then he had this, as you learned about it, a special technique for triangulating the sides of the vessels so that they could be more easily sewn together.
Yeah, and the museum has the original tube that was used for, or no, what was it? The tube was used to transfuse the blood, or was that a separate one, the Teflon tubes?
Oh, those are grafts. But what we do have is suturing needles and some forceps from Carell's experiment. It was actually 1906 when he did this. And
he was good at drawing too. This was his original sketch. It's signed.
And didn't you say something about how when he was a child he studied embroidery or?
Yeah, I have notes about that kind of stuff. So yeah, he was able to do something like 500 stitches in a cigarette paper, all kinds of stuff. Especially the Time magazine article mentioned that.
And then.
So I was reading about this blood vessel suturing that he was doing, the triangulation, and I found out through various research that what initially inspired him to get into this was the death of a French president. Alexis Carrel was French. A French president, Sadi Carnot, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but anyway, who was assassinated. He had a stab wound to the gut. And so his blood vessels in the gut were severed. And at the time, this was late 1800s, at the time there was no way to suture those together. So Corral made it his life's work to figure out how to do that because he was very moved by that event. So I thought that was really interesting, these kind of inspirations for people, that scientists, instead of kind of just working with the math or whatever, they have a personal interest in the things that they're pursuing. So this looked like a huge tangle of blood vessels. So I decided to pick this particular oval ink spill. And here are my plans for the piece. So I started thinking about how to draw these blood vessels. And initially I thought about including a heart in there, but later I decided not to because I wanted to include the image of the suturing itself right in the center of this piece. And I started working with materials I hadn't worked with in a long time, like gouache. I usually work with color pencil and graphite. So I went into a little bit of painting too. I usually mostly draw. And here was a study of one of the artery forceps from the museum collection that the museum just happens to have. And I thought, well, that'd be nice because if I go back here, it's kind of difficult to see. But on the left, there are two clamps holding the blood vessel, preventing it from bursting. And here's my little sketch of the artery forceps. So here it is again, the ink blot, and then once I finished drawing and painting, this is what it looked like. So here's the triangulation method, which is, what it really is just pulling the walls of the blood vessel into a triangular shape and pulling it from three ends to create to create lines, basically, on which you can sew instead of going around in a circle. And here's a detail image. So I incorporated another item from the collection that wasn't particularly directly related to Corral. The museum did have Corral's needle and the little holding the forceps.
Yeah, there's scissors, I believe, and forceps.
But these forceps were unrelated, but still they were used in surgery in general. So the next item I decided to work on that really struck me was the Gratin osteoclast. So this was, after having finished the first two pieces that related to Lindbergh and Corral, I decided to go into something different. And
well, this is on display in our orthopedics exhibits, and it's another one of actually my favorite artifacts in the museum. And what it was used for was early 20th century, when children had like bone deformities due to usually nutritional deficiencies or infectious diseases. They would use this device, sorry, to break the bones in order to reset them so that they would grow together, knit together in a straight fashion. And there was concern at the time about making incisions and the danger of infection. So this was a form of what was called dry surgery. And then this osteoclast that we have came from a doctor in Chicago, and then these are, in back of it, photos that also came with the osteoclast that show before and after pictures of the children who were actually treated with this very device. And yes, the man who used it was named Elvin J. Burkheiser. And so in the course of Vesna's work, we learned a little bit more about him and the photographs. And it turns out that there were actually two doctors in Chicago who were known for using this device, and they both worked at a place called the Home for Destitute Crippled Children. And so Wallace Blanchard was the first, and he published a great deal in support of the osteoclast versus open surgery, and many of the photos of children were published in those articles.
Yeah, and oddly enough, the Home for Destitute Crippled Children is still listed on Google Maps. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's really hard to say because you click on the link and it doesn't go anywhere, but it seems like more like it's a social services agency at this point.
Yeah.
But hard to say, and why they didn't decide to change the name, God only knows.
So, so I knew I wanted to work with this. I mean, the story and the reason why, how it was used, it was called the bloodless bloodless osteoclast, kind of like the bone cell, osteoclast, the bone. The
Yeah,
cell
it's now used as a term for a certain type of bone cell.
that like gets rid of, I don't know a lot about medicine, but that gets rid of dead bones, I guess, damaged
Yeah,
bones.
class has to do with destroying or breaking
Right.
up.
So this instrument just looks so shocking, and you know, partly because of the story of how it was used, that it would basically break children's legs. Children who had rickets, who had a deficiency in vitamin D and grew up with rickets, it would just basically break their legs and then reset them. So that was a shock, and I thought I had to do something about this instrument. And I didn't know, when I don't know how to start or where to begin with the work, I just start sketching. Part of that is also to try and get to know the thing that I'm looking at a little bit better. Drawing it kind of brings me to a kind of personal view of this thing. And so I sketched the osteoclast and discovered that once I saw my sketch, once it was done, I thought, this looks like some kind of a wind-up toy, like a child's wind-up toy. It looks more bubbly than it does in person, and it could be because of how I treated the reflections and things like that. Here's the angle that I was looking at it from. And so I thought, gosh, so if it looks like a wind-up toy and these were children, there's a weird connection there. So I started looking up toys from that period, and I thought maybe I could do something that combined the kind of toys that children at this facility might have been playing with, and you know, trying to actually find out what kind of toys existed then that don't exist now, or maybe still exist. This was before plastic, so it was the 19-teens and 20s mostly. And most of the toys were made of wood and metal, actually, and I came across this little article. And the museum had a few other artifacts that also contributed, so there was
These were additional items related to the osteoclast. So this was actually the wooden case that it came in, which was engraved with the name of one of the doctors who used it. We're unclear exactly from our research what the relationship was, whether Blanchard, who was Burkheiser's predecessor, had passed along the same instrument to Burkheiser, and for some reason someone decided to inscribe his name on a plaque, or if
as a gift.
Burkheiser got his own when he took over. But that's one unclear. And then we do have, so there are 7 of the photos that were on display in the orthopedics exhibit, but we also had an additional 6 representing 3 more children and their before and after pictures that we brought out of storage for Vesna to look at. And there is, you can see the key for the wooden case that the osteoclast came in as well.
So here are some of the pictures of the children before and after. These were the ones that were not displayed in the museum thus far. They were in the archives. And interestingly enough, on the back of these pictures, the names of the children were written down, and that really struck me. I started thinking about who these children might have been, you know, how they may have lived. And then I was looking at toys, and I discovered that a lot of toys that are still used today actually were invented around this period, like the Lincoln Logs, for example, or the teddy bear. So that was a lot of interesting research, and so I decided to start thinking about how to incorporate these toys with the osteoclast and the images of the children. So that, and I came across this. This was pretty wild. So I came across this image on a website for company that repairs dolls, and this was their before and after image, and I found this strange correlation with the images of the before and after of the children with the doll. That was very disconcerting. I do want to say that, because yeah, all of this, I mean, it was difficult to work with this stuff, looking at these pictures and thinking about how these kids may have lived and all this stuff. So this was the first piece, and this piece came from basically I decided to work with one toy per piece and to assign the toy to sort of imagine what a child's life may have been like and to sort of assign a toy to a child as though they maybe played with it. And I enjoy doing this because I feel like having something that looks potentially like medical illustration, this to me looks like cells, maybe bone cells, but then including things that are not related kind of creates a certain shift or makes one think, at least makes me think, like, how is this related? Why is this in here? And so I started to include various toys, and here I was thinking about something called hibernation. I read about this, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but basically it's when the bone, when one has rickets, when the bone hardens abruptly, and it's not, it turns into a kind of ivory-like consistency and becomes very shiny and polished, which I related to the marble. So one of the children in the literature about these kids and how they, what they went through really, one of the children that happened to, and the bone was over-hardened when they went and did the operation on the child. So there was a loud snap apparently. But I decided to include a little bit of the osteoclast in there as a sort of memory or an impression or something that may have left an impression on this child and their personality. And here's a close-up view. So after this piece, I decided to work with wind-up, like a winding key. And so the second piece, which is the notebook page on the right, has the winding key on the outside as though the surgeon would be using the winding key. And here's several antique winding keys that I found for toys. So I liken this instrument to a sort of wind-up toy, and then I have a kind of a lacy image of bone cells overlaying this image, and that's a piece of the osteoclast, one aspect of it. Here's a close-up view. And then other toys, so I found these creepy, to me anyway, rocking dolls of some sort. I don't know if they had a specific name, but so I decided to use the clown as one of the toys for one of the children. Here's a close-up. And then Tinker Toys. Those are kind of iconic toy, and they've stuck around for a long time. They were used back then, and so I decided to use Tinker Toys, and I kind of started comparing how the parts of the Tinker Toys fit in a similar way that this osteoclast fits, and how one could play with them and sort of rearrange things.
And also how the doctors were in a way rearranging the bones of the child through their actions. One of the kids had 10 fractures done. At least that's what it says in the literature. 10 fractures at once, and they reset them immediately and put them in a cast. And 6 months later, the child is walking with straight legs. But I mean, that must have been traumatic. Typically, the kids were about 5 years old, anywhere from 4 to 6. That seemed to be the ideal age for this operation. I think the cutoff point was 12 or 13 was when they stopped and wouldn't have done this type of operation on the child.
So here's the Tinker Toy image with rods added on the inside. And here's a close-up. So this is done in color pencil on top of the ink. And then I'm just throwing this in at the end because I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about my interactions with people at the museum, which is what this residency originally was intended for, is that when I'm working on this stuff, I am sitting in the museum and people can come up to me and talk to me while I'm drawing. And a lot of times people come up and ask me, what are you doing? What is this? Why are you drawing a clown? You know, or whatever I happen to be working on at the moment. You know, I was drawing the osteoclast images with the children, and one elderly man came up to me and said, "Oh, I've done that procedure," which was wild. And he said, "We did it a little differently. look it up, here's a note, and he left and came back with this stuff written out for me and gave me this little note. So it's kind of amazing. And it's amazing to hear how people respond to the work and what they get drawn to and what they don't get drawn to that I thought they might be, and then what I kind of respond to what they give me and stuff like that. It's been really incredible working here.
So just to follow up on that, can you recall an interaction that you thought was particularly rewarding for you with the visitor? And then maybe something where you thought your interaction with them made their experience here more rewarding?
Yeah, I've had several. I mean, this was one of them, definitely. Direct reference was provided. But also, I had one woman come in, she said she was a nurse, and she saw some of the images on display, some of my sketchbook pages actually. I had previous sketchbooks photocopied and pasted across the walls before I really got into this work, before I had much to show really. And one image included a vine of tomatoes. This was from that farm I mentioned earlier in the talk. A vine of tomatoes growing in an abdomen, and I was sort of comparing that vine to the blood vessels in the abdomen as a sort of fractal, mathematical fractal image that has this parallel. And she looked at that and thought, I had never thought of this. I never thought that there's these repeating images that, trees and veins and all these things have a very similar structure and actually come from a similar kind of mathematical perspective too. So that was really great. And then I had a couple come in and tell me that after they talked to me, they actually viewed the museum differently. They would walk up to some of the instruments around the museum and see them differently, see them with more, knowing the stories and sort of knowing the background a little bit and seeing how I was perceiving them. They would kind of go back and look at these instruments and think, and they told me that they really responded to that because they felt like they came to life in a way. And I guess that contextualized these objects for them in a different way. Within the museum.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
The sense of the winding staircase, and how did that interact with your exploration of that tension zone between the inner and the outer, and where that place is?
The staircase in the Lindbergh piece, or the staircase early on that I showed of the museum? Which one
I think early on.
The first one of the museum?
Yes.
Well, I included that image as an example of how I was looking at the building as an architectural structure that affected my body in a way because it was designed for living. It doesn't feel like a very institutional kind of large concrete museum. It feels like a home. It feels like a living room. And I don't know that the staircase in particular had anything specific in my work, except for the one staircase in the Rockefeller Center. That was really interesting to me, and I wanted to include that because in order to enter that laboratory, you had to climb the staircase.
And you went from one space to another.
Yeah.
And we have so many different spaces in our own body. And
Yeah.
our mind then furnishes more space. And sometimes the silver mind control method is worked on mind force extending significantly beyond your body per se.
Yeah, the possibilities are endless.
Also, it visually makes sense in this case because the device itself is a cylinder, and any type of spiral staircase is usually in a cylindrical kind of shaft like that.
Yeah, and I did do a residency in 2012 in an old chapel in Troy, New York, where I directly made work that related the human body to architecture specifically. And so I didn't want to necessarily repeat that here. Honestly, as I said early on, I didn't know what I was going to do. There was so many possibilities. And I decided to sort of pick one instrument at a time and work on that instead. Because it was just overwhelming. It was too much.
Have you ever been struck by the sense of when you are in a neighborhood and see the house from 50 or 100 feet away or further, or even from the expressway, that it sort of is like a visage, and it's very curious when you look at that and see sometimes there are, we might think of them as happy visages, and other times frowning or stolid or lithe or,
Do you feel that way about this building when you approach it?
oh, this building is mysterious, dramatic, and it changes you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Anyone else?
Lindsay, could you remind me what the building is replicated as?
Oh, sure. The building was completed in 1917 as a single-family residence for a woman named Eleanor Robinson Countess, and she was the daughter of an executive at the Diamond Match Company, and he left each of his 4 daughters a home building trust fund, and so she spent hers on this building, which is a replica of the Petit Trianon on the grounds of Versailles, which was Marie Antoinette's kind of private retreat from court. And strangely enough, one of Eleanor Robinson Countess's sisters also built a replica of the Petit Trianon with her house building trust fund, except in Connecticut. So
Is this the only one that has the extra floor?
this one does have an extra floor. The original chateau was only 3 floors, but Eleanor decided that it was just not quite big enough for her needs. And actually, she had the piles built into the sand so deep that it could support an extra 10 floors, because her plan was not to give her children a house building trust fund, but just to build up on this building so that they would all live in this giant kind of high-rise right here. Anyone?
So now where would you say you are with this foundation that you've created?
Yeah,
Where are you going?
I found 16 children in the literature. 15 of them are named and one of them is anonymous. And so I'm going to make 16 total of those ink blots with rattan, osteoclast, and a toy. And then I'm going to create, this is what I plan to do, who knows what will actually happen, but then I'm going to create another piece for 2 pieces, one for each surgeon who performed this dry surgery. And then after that, I'm going to pick another instrument and then take it from there, potentially sketch it, or we'll see. So, yeah.
How long is this residency?
Right now, it's planned for 2015.
Yeah, I think we originally planned for 1 year, and Vesna got so involved, and she wanted to hopefully extend it for another year. So I think right now we're looking at like a final exhibition in October of 2015.
Yeah.
The gentleman that passed you the note while you had a long conversation with him, what was his ethnic background? Like, where was he performing this procedure? Was just out of curiosity.
I don't know.
No.
Actually, it wasn't a very long conversation. I think it was a couple. It was 2 people, if I remember correctly. Sometimes tours come through and various people come through, but he.
Don't interrupt you while you're working, probably. Or
Yeah, I don't know, but he kind of came up really quickly and asked me what I was doing, and I told him, and then he said, "Oh, I've performed that," and then he said, "Let me remember," and then he left. And I thought he had left, but he came back 10 minutes later with this note. So he must have either looked it up or something.
Yeah, it had a reference to a journal.
Yeah, it was the very last slide.
You said it was in the 50s?
Yeah, I think like the osteoclast and similar kind of dry surgery procedures kind of lasted for at least 50 years. I mean, they may have become less frequent over time as like sterilization measures and antisepsis became better. There was less fear about infection, and but even at the time when we were reading these articles, 1900 through 1920, there was a lot of debate back and forth, which was better, which was more accurate. How do you weigh the risks one against another?
There was a real feud. I mean, they were scathing reviews of each other's procedures. So, one surgeon would write, "Oh, this surgeon from Austria did a terrible job. He doesn't know what he's doing. Our procedure's much better, and so they kept going back and forth and kind of arguing about what's better and what's not through these journal articles that anybody could read, really.
And yeah, Adolf Lorenz was known as the bloodless surgeon of Vienna, and he also was. Interestingly, it was because he was actually allergic to carbolic acid, which was used for antisepsis at the time, so he didn't really have it. He made it into a type of ideological belief, but then he did get in a feud with all the Chicago doctors, even though they practiced the same method, and he was banned from visiting any Chicago hospitals or medical forums. It was very strange.
So, I'm sorry, did you ever get his name?
Whose name?
The gentleman who left you the note?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I didn't write it down, but he told me his name at the time.
Well, if that's all, thank you again very much for coming, and please help yourself to refreshments, and then feel free to visit Vesna's studio and see some of the completed work. As well as we just put together a case of some of the items from the collection that influenced her research and the drawings, which is also in her room on the 3rd floor, and the whole museum's open, so you're welcome to look around as well. Thank you.